Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to our workshop on how to do research and get published. Today, we're going to be focusing on what it takes to get published in academic journals, specifically on how to write and structure an article's front matter. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. First, I'd like to introduce you to the team who you will be hearing from. First, we've got Robert Tинкл, who is a publishing editor for SAGE, managing a suite of journals in humanities and social sciences. Before SAGE, he earned his PhD in English literature from Johns Hopkins University, where he also served as associate editor for the journal English Literary History and directed the JHU Writing Center. He has published original research in journals devoted to Renaissance literature, culture, and history, and has taught several college-level courses in English and compositional writing. We're also joined by Alex Mersen, a publishing editor on the STM Journal's editorial team, managing a range of scientific and medical journals. Alex has a background in content management, magazine publishing, and literary publishing. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in International Studies from the University of Denver and a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the University of New Orleans. We're also joined by Colleen Cordy, an Associate Professor Emerita at the University of Illinois Chicago College of Nursing, where she served as deputy of the PhD program and taught research design and methods. She is also deputy editor of Substance Use and Addiction Journal. Dr. Cordy's program of research is focused on the drinker identity as a cognitive vulnerability for alcohol use and alcohol problems. She has published widely in interdisciplinary substance use journals, as well as nursing research and clinical journals. She is a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing, and her research has been recognized by the Research Society on Alcoholism, the Midwest Nursing Research Society, and the Association of Multidisciplinary Education and Research in Substance Use and Addiction. And last, I am Shon Skarbrik, a marketing manager on the author marketing team at SAGE. My primary role is to provide support to authors and reviewers as they move through the publishing process, with a particular focus on providing targeted resources to provide support at the appropriate time in the publication process. I have a BA in history from Manhattan College and an MA in history from Hunter College, and I'm based out of New York. So today, please feel free to send us your questions as we go through the webinar. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box. Type anything you'd like us to address. And please do note that if you have any particular questions that you would like us to address that you see posed, like them, and we'll start with those that have the most likes. So the chart here is a timeline of the typical author journey, moving from the early stages of securing funding and conducting research all the way through peer review and publication. Today, we're focusing specifically on how to write and structure an article's front matter. And we encourage you to go back and watch recordings of other topics we've covered in the series, including how to write and format a manuscript and how to navigate the peer review process. And with that, I'm happy to pass this over to Robert to get us started.
All right, thank you, Shon, and thank you so much to all of you in the audience for being here today. It's really exciting to see this huge level of interest in this webinar, so thank you. As you know, today we're discussing an article's front matter. We're sort of defining that as all of the writing that you're going to be doing sort of beyond the article itself, the main article. So that includes things like your title, your abstract. We'll talk about sort of the list of keywords that you might produce from your article. And then we're also going to talk about sort of search engine optimization, or in other words, sort of how to use keywords to optimize your article for search engine discoverability. And we'll also talk a bit about promoting your article. I want to start with this sort of metaphor, I guess you could call it, of reverse engineering. I really encourage you to sort of not even think about any of the stuff that we're talking about today until after your article is already finished or maybe very nearly finished. That's because it's only at that point that you're really in a position to reflect on what's actually on the page. For those of you that have already written a full-length article or maybe several, or even just a long essay, you know that often, as writers, as researchers, we end up in a very different place than we begin in, as our argument, accrues nuance or maybe moves in completely unexpected directions. Maybe the results of your experiment are not what you thought they might be. And so it's really a good idea to kind of wait until your article is complete or very nearly complete before you even begin to think about things like titles and abstracts. So again, you can sort of do that work of reflecting of what do I actually have here and what am I actually providing for my reader. That said, keep in mind that these are the very first elements your reader is going to see, even if they are the last elements that you will write. So we're going to sort of talk, now about sort of, strategies, tips for sort of how to make that content as compelling as possible for a reader who is probably coming at your article sort of fresh and new. So that leads us then to sort of part one of this talk, which is all about titles. You'll see that I've sort of I've got 5 boxes here. These are all just sort of features or elements I think that sort of gesture to the importance of titles. So a title is the very first thing your reader, likely to be the very first thing your reader will see regarding your article. It sort of sets the tone for your reader's engagement, communicates the key topics of your article, and I'll talk in a bit about sort of distinction between topics versus arguments. Your title will sort of lurk in the back of your reader's mind as they then embark on your abstract and main article. And finally, the article itself must make good on the promise of the title. So what this is really all getting at is that the title is sort of your reader's first impression of your piece, and we all know how important first impressions can be. And you sort of want to walk this line between neither sort of under-promising nor over-promising anything to your reader in your title. So you want your title to be as kind of direct and straightforward. It's creative, but as sort of direct as it can be, so that your reader is not sort of surprised when they sort of then embark upon your main article. So again, we're going to talk today a bit more about how to do that. Okay, so on this slide, I've got some tips for how to structure an article. The first and probably the most important really is to, I really encourage you to familiarize yourself with the ways that titles are structured, both in your broader discipline and in the specific journal that you want to publish with. This is really a question of sort of who's your target audience, what academic communities are you speaking to. It's really a good idea to, if you have a journal in mind that you think you might want to submit your piece to, go to that journal and really read the titles from sort of previous issues, especially for maybe the past 1 to 3 years, to kind of get a sense of what titles look like in your field so that you can sort of mimic that a little bit in your own piece. The next piece of advice here is to really pay attention to word order. So I'm about to show you 2 titles that are actually very similar, but we're going to talk about, I want you to, as you read these, to sort of reflect on sort of which of these titles do you think is kind of more catchy, more interesting, more compelling. So the first of these titles is Effects of Carnosine on Mouse Brain Parkinson's Disease Pathology. Okay, the second title is Carnosine, a Promising Molecule in a Mouse Model of Parkinson's Disease. Now, these are actually both perfectly good titles. You can sort of imagine seeing really either one of them in a journal that is devoted to this subject matter. However, I hope you agree with me that the second title is sort of the more interesting, the more compelling, the kind of better version if you had to pick between the two. But why is that? Because as you'll notice, they both use a very similar kind of word cluster, right? They both use the word carnosine, mouse, Parkinson's disease. So it's really the word order in the end that differentiates them. You'll see that in the second title, the kind of main object of study there, carnosine, is right there at the top of the title. It's the first thing your reader sees. That provides a lot of clarity, right? Your reader knows exactly kind of what this piece is going to be about. That word carnosine, which is kind of, it's like the marquee in front of a theater, right? It's got all the lights around it, followed by a colon, and then kind of a longer, more descriptive subtitle that then tells your reader what exactly is so important about this molecule carnosine, right? In the first version of this title, the word effects doesn't really do that same kind of work. It's a very neutral word. Your reader doesn't know if these effects are even positive or negative. And that leads me then to the second point about this, which is that word promising, that kind of value-laden term, right, that we'd sort of miss in the first version of the title. And so that word promising sort of gives your reader, it gives the title rather sort of a sense of purpose, of direction. We sort of know, you know, it piques your reader's interest to know more exactly about exactly sort of what's going on with carnosine, right? What makes it so promising? So it's just kind of some tricks you can employ to kind of make your title, you know, a more interesting version of itself. And as you'll see, one very typical format for academic titles is that kind of structure of the kind of, you know, flashy, you know, impactful sort of fore title, followed by a colon, followed then by kind of a longer, more descriptive, more explanatory subtitle. Now, this is by no means the only game in town. There are a lot of different ways you can format an academic title. This is just one that you see quite often. It's proven quite durable in academia and really across disciplines as well. So again, not the only way to structure a title, but you know, when in doubt, it's often sort of a good format to kind of fall back to. And then finally, I've got sort of 4 tips here. These are probably things you might already know, but it never hurts to go over them again. In your title, you want to be as direct as you can possibly be. Again, try to sort of avoid either over-promising or under-promising your reader anything with your title. You want to be concise yet informative. So again, this is not a hard and fast rule, but typically it's a good rule of thumb to kind of keep your title at 15 words or less. Anything longer than that becomes a bit sort of unwieldy. We don't want our titles to be kind of full sentences. We want them to be sort of collections of topics and nouns, and I'll go over that a bit more in a moment. In your title too, you really want to avoid abbreviations. This is really kind of a search engine optimization issue. Abbreviations can mean more than one thing, so you really want to be sure that the search engine, whether it's Google or Google Scholar, is going to kind of categorize your article correctly. If you have an abbreviation that could potentially mean multiple things, that could become a problem. And the last one, I actually can't see the last one because my Zoom functions are covering it. But let's see. Oh, okay. Avoid jargon, but emphasize keywords. This is sometimes kind of a tight or sort of a thin rope to walk, because every academic field contains jargon. What I mean here is that you want to avoid sort of jargon that is kind of maybe too arcane or too kind of in the weeds. At the same time, you want to make sure that your title is full of sort of good, meaningful, impactful keywords that are important both to your research and to the field as a whole. And again, this is plays into a bit of the sort of search engine optimization question, in that you want your reader to be kind of, if they're searching for your article, to be Googling or just typing into the search bar words that are not sort of so obscure that your reader's not even going to sort of come up with them themselves, right? So you want to kind of use keywords that someone searching for your article is going to be able to come up with and find your article that way. Next slide. So here I've pulled, these are all journals that I happen to be managing. So I sort of thumbed through them and just plucked out titles that I thought were sort of compelling and interesting, maybe you want to read the full article. I'm not going to read all these out loud just for the sake of time, but if you can spend yourselves just sort of 10 seconds to just glance over these, and on the next slide we will talk about sort of what makes these compelling titles. So I'll give you just about 10 seconds, just read these sort of to yourself, and we'll say more about them in a sec. Okay, you can go ahead and move to the next slide. So what do all these titles have in common? And again, this is being recorded, and you'll have access to the slide deck after the presentation. So if you want to kind of go back and spend more time with these, please feel free to. I think as you do that, you'll see that all of these titles are quite clear. These are all kind of coming from humanities and social science journals, but they're kind of all coming from different corners of that larger umbrella. And yet, I think even for non-experts, non-practitioners, these titles are quite clear. We know exactly what we're getting into with the article. They're not sort of under or over promising anything. They make strong use of keywords. This is important, and this is related to that notion of keywords. You'll see that a title of an academic article is really mostly kind of a collection of nouns with sometimes one or maybe even 0 verbs. And that gets into a distinction I'm going to make in a moment between sort of topics versus arguments. So titles are really kind of, it's nouns, it's subject matter, it's topics that we're really covering here in a title. And for many, they sort of follow that catchy title followed by a more descriptive subtitle format that we looked at earlier. I just want to say very quickly, catchy should never mean sort of gimmicky. A catchy title sort of within kind of an academic framework, it might incorporate sort of a pun or some kind of wordplay. For example, so we saw on the previous slide, Reddit on Reddit, right? That would be an example of wordplay. They might sort of contain a short, pithy quotation, some kind of meaningful allusion, etc. So some kind of creative use of language that is nonetheless not sort of over flashy, over showy, not gimmicky, but nonetheless, infuses a bit of fun, I guess, into the title for your reader. Next point then is this issue, sort of dichotomy I brought up of sort of topics versus arguments. So topics are closely related to keywords. They're almost always nouns, and they provide an overview of subject matter. So what I want you to take away from that is that titles are really topic driven, in contrast to your abstract or your main article, which is going to be argument driven. Arguments are all about verbs. And again, that argument will become abstract will become explicit in your abstract and in your main article. So titles are all about topics, nouns. It's not until the abstract and the main argument that you sort of get into the territory of argument and verbs. Okay, so main takeaways here. Again, titles will make strong use of keywords. They'll have kind of that sense of purpose or direction. You're free to use kind of humor or creative flourishes in your title if appropriate. It depends on the journal, it depends on the field. One can imagine, for certain subject matter, humor in a title is simply not appropriate. So please, use your discretion there. But it is okay to, sort of have a kind of, linguistically creative or interesting title. And that gets me to the next point, which I just want to reiterate. Please do familiarize yourself with titles in your field and in the journal that you're submitting to. And finally, with titles, often less is more. Again, titles are sort of an overview of topics. You really want to save the sort of verb-driven arguments for your abstract in your main article. And then I have just kind of a final bit of advice there at the top left. Keep in mind, let's say that your article is cited in other research. So, there's another article, there's say a footnote, and it says, for more on this, subject, see, and then the name of your article. So that's just to reiterate that again, titles are all about first impressions. You want a reader to sort of, who's maybe thumbing through those footnotes to say, oh, that looks really interesting, right? That jumps out to me. Maybe that's what I work on too. And you want that title alone to sort of be the thing that drives that reader then to the journal that your article is housed in, and read the full article. So just again, another kind of note about the importance of titles and making that first impression. Okay, so that leads us then to our part 2, which is on crafting a compelling abstract. Again, I have kind of 5 main, features, I guess, of abstracts that sort of speak to their importance. For those of you that might not know, might be sort of early stage in your career, an abstract is basically a paragraph at the top of the article. It sort of comes right in between the title and the main article. And it's kind of a short paragraph that kind of really lays out kind of a roadmap of the whole paper. It's kind of a summary of your argument and kind of the salient features of the argument. So your abstract is really the first elaboration of an argument, as opposed to sort of merely topics that your reader will see. That abstract is going to hopefully pull in some of the important keywords from the title, and that's in order to create kind of a sense of continuity across sort of title, abstract, and then into your main article. Again, it helps you to kind of neither overpromise nor underpromise your reader anything from your title if some of those keywords are then pulled into the abstract. Your abstract will sort of define and maybe even expand upon those keywords, and or will introduce some new ones. Number 4 here is probably the most important takeaway about abstracts. There's a lot of different ways you can write an abstract. Everyone has their own writing style, but if you read enough of them, you'll find that they pretty almost universally follow this kind of formula, I guess you can call it, for lack of a better word, of sort of problem, methods, takeaways. By problem, we mean the kind of main sort of critical question that your article is asking, the main kind of query that drives your research. Methods or methodologies are sort of then the means by which you begin to address that main critical question. For me, for example, I'm coming from within literary studies. In my methods section in my abstract, I might make clear, if I'm looking at a piece of literature, am I coming at this from a Marxist perspective? Am I coming at it from a psychoanalytic perspective? Maybe a feminist perspective, right? So these are the different methods that are available to your field, whatever that field might be, by which you sort of begin to approach and address that critical question that you've posed at the top of the abstract. And then finally, in the last sort of sentence or two, you will sort of elaborate your takeaways, or another word for that would be your conclusions, the results. What is it that your research arrived at? How are you addressing that main problem that you posed at the beginning, etc. So your abstract really then kind of sort of fleshes out your title. If the title is kind of the skeleton, the abstract is kind of the flesh and blood that sort of gives its life to that title, and it provides a kind of schema of the article. So just quickly, some key considerations here. Concision, clarity, and strategic use of keywords are just as important in abstracts as we've seen that they were in titles. Unlike titles, abstracts will make use of what I'm calling signaling language, and I'm going to say more about that in a moment, so we'll kind of skim over that for now. That's more on that to come. Again, abstracts present sort of this argument in miniature that really follows that formula: problem, methods, takeaways. And again, I really highly encourage you to actually open up the journal that you're thinking of submitting to and just reading several abstracts to kind of absorb a sense of sort of how they're structured, how they're written for that journal and for that field. So here, and again, I'm not going to read all this for the sake of time, but this is a familiar headline. We saw this, or sorry, a familiar title rather. We saw this on a previous slide. Reddit on Reddit: homogeneity and ideological segregation in the age of social news, followed by the abstract for that article. So again, you'll have access to these slides. You can read this. On the next slide, I'm going to sort of show you, and you can go ahead and move to that next slide now. Show you kind of how that problem, methods, takeaways is sort of is broken down as it sort of applies to sort of a real abstract. So you can see here the first sentence of that abstract elaborates the problem. This article empirically revisits the idea of ideological segregation and homogeneity in social networks, particularly on reddit.com. Now, that part that I've highlighted is the signaling language that I referred to earlier. So revisits the idea of. The topic, the kind of main critical question this article is addressing, presenting, is this notion of ideological segregation and homogeneity in social networks. That phrase revisits the idea of, especially with that verb revisits, is doing quite a lot of good work to show your reader, hey, this is ground that's maybe been covered before. Other researchers have sort of looked at this issue of ideological segregation and homogeneity in social networks. However, this author, is revisiting that idea. So the idea here being that, we're going to sort of tread familiar ground, but hopefully arrive at some sort of new novel conclusion about those kind of previously discussed topics. So that signaling language does a lot of work to show you, here's the problem, and also here's kind of a sense of the stakes of the problem, or here's how I, as the researcher, am going to sort of complicate that, nuance that, and sort of contribute to the research in that sense. We then move to methods. So using a computer-assisted analysis on a corpus of comments, it studies the relation between the tone of those comments and then these three political topics that the author enumerates. Again, I've highlighted that kind of signaling language that shows you, hey, here's the method I'm using, right? A computer-assisted analysis, and then this bit about sort of the relation between comments and topics, also sort of gestures to a sort of methodology, right? That we're studying the relationality between these things. That then is followed at the end by sort of the takeaways, right? And again, you have this really good, clear signaling language. Results show, that tells your reader, here's the result, here's the conclusion, right? Here's the takeaway. So it shows, X, Y, and Z. And then in this case, results also show ... There's more than one conclusion. And again, that's all signaled very clearly by the use of signaling language here. So go ahead and move on to the next. I have another example here. Again, just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go over this one now, but as you sort of revisit this recording or the slides themselves, you can sort of look through this yourself, and you can move to the next slide. I've again sort of broken down for you how this works on the kind of problems, methods, takeaways, format of sort of structuring your abstract. And again, I've highlighted the signaling language to sort of show, how do you signal to your reader, okay, here's the problem, here are my methods, here are my takeaways. Next slide. Okay, so those two abstracts both sort of came from humanities and social science fields. I also wanted to show you an example of an abstract in a STM journal. So this is from Academic Forensic Pathology, which is a journal published by SAGE, as were the other journals as well. Here, I don't have a formal slide on this, but I want to sort of bring to your attention a distinction between what are called structured abstracts versus unstructured abstracts. Now, that language is maybe a little bit odd or misleading because theoretically, every abstract is well structured, right? Your abstract ought to be a very sort of well-structured, well-written piece of writing. What differentiates them is that a structured abstract will actually contain these sort of section headings that you see in this example, so introduction, methods, results, conclusion, whereas an unstructured abstract will sort of just be a paragraph that kind of internally follows that formula of problem, methods, takeaways, but doesn't necessarily have these section headings. So these structured abstracts, like you see here, are really increasingly being used, especially in STM fields, that's science, technology, medicine, and then also engineering. So if you're in those fields, it's especially important that you sort of pay attention to the manuscript guidelines or submission guidelines of the journal that you're submitting to see, do they want a structured abstract, or are they okay with an unstructured abstract? And if they do want a structured abstract, how do they structure that? Because not every journal is going to use the same verbiage of introduction, methods, results, conclusion. That's what this particular journal uses, but other journals might call it something different. So you really want to make sure you're consulting the submission guidelines to ensure that your structured abstract looks kind of how every other structured abstract in the journal or in that field sort of looks. Okay, so finally, main takeaways about abstracts. Your abstract, again, is sort of your reader's first introduction to the kind of overview or bullet points of your argument. Remember this formula: problem, methods, takeaways. Your abstract should clearly lay out a main research question, the methods used to address that question, and then finally the results or the takeaways. Use keywords to really help focus your abstract, present those distilled main ideas or findings. Typically, in humanities and social science fields, your abstract is going to clock in at around 4 to 5 sentences. Again, not a hard and fast rule. That's just sort of a good rule of thumb. And in STM, especially if you're dealing with a structured abstract that has those kinds of section headings, they tend to clock in at a bit longer, more closer to 10 sentences. Again, consult the manuscript guidelines of the journal you're submitting to. They often will have kind of a suggested, not sentence count, but a word count of anywhere from, say, 150 to 300 words. Which tends to kind of map onto, at least in humanities and social sciences, about 4 to 5 sentences. And then finally, my last point here is to please spend as much time as you can on your abstract. You might think, gosh, I've been working on this article for a year. I know it like the back of my hand. I'll just, kind of churn out an abstract in 10 minutes. It's actually deceptively tricky and challenging to sort of distill a very complex, nuanced academic argument in just a few sentences. So really take some time with this. Write 3 or 4 versions of an abstract if you are able, and that gives you some opportunity to kind of determine which one you think is the most effective. So don't leave this kind of thing for the last minute as you're kind of submitting your article. Really sort of take the time to write a really good, tight, focused, well-structured abstract. Okay, and with that, I'm going to hand this off to Alex to talk about search engine optimization and marketing or promoting your article.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, so now that Robert gave us a baseline of what titles and abstracts are and how we can format them and write them, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about how we can leverage our titles and abstracts in order to actually make our articles more discoverable. So in this section, we'll be talking about promoting your article, and those things you can do in the article's front matter that will make it more discoverable on the internet, specifically for search engine optimization, and then how you can market your article on social media and in your other networks. So if you're not familiar, search engine optimization refers to the process of making your content discoverable on Google and other search engines. The first step of this is to decide on your keywords. A great place to start is to think about what key phrases you would actually use in Google if you were searching for your own article. It's best to be specific, for instance, using metabolic pathway instead of metabolism. Search engines are more likely to pick up on your article or related articles with more specific phrases. And so once you've decided on your keyword or phrase, you're going to use it in your article front matter. So you're going to want to use it at least once, but probably no more than twice in your title. You use it 3 to 4 times in your abstract, and then 3 to 7 times in your keyword field. We'll look at some examples of what this looks like in titles and abstracts. But it's important to remember that 60% of referral traffic to Sage journals is driven by Google and Google Scholar. So making your article search engine friendly is very important. So the title is the most important place for your keyword. Robert talked about how that's all about first impressions. And for Google too, your title is giving the search engine its first impression. So you want to make sure that you're using your keywords in your title. But you also want to make sure you're using your keywords in section headings when applicable, and use variants and abbreviations wherever possible. And it's important to remember that search engines can also unindex articles if they flag too much repetition. So try to repeat your keywords without overusing. And this is where using variants and abbreviations can come in. Too much repetition can get your article flagged as spam or bot activity. So use those keywords, but make sure you're also using them in a way that's natural and makes sense. So here's an example of an abstract and a title and how they divvied up their keywords. So the keyword here, hospital spending, you'll see is used 6 times in different ways in the abstract. See how they use hospital spending and hospital spending in different ways. Additionally, occupational therapy is used as a secondary keyword in the title and abstract. So if someone were to Google search hospital spending on occupational therapy, this article is likely to come up. When you receive the slides after this session, I recommend going back to read this example, and you can go over Robert's examples as well, and see and take note of how naturally the keywords fit into the abstract. They're used 4 to 6 times, but every time they're used, it makes sense, and there's still a natural flow to the writing. So another aspect of front matter that makes your work more accessible is plain language summaries. So plain language summaries are shorter, non-technical summaries of articles that are usually around 300 words. They come right after the abstract and allow the author to explain the article to non-experts. Think about how you might explain your research to your friend or a partner or a relative. This is a great way to make sure that research is accessible to non-specialists. Make sure to write in short, concise sentences, use simplified terms, avoid jargon and acronyms, and simplify your data. Not every article is going to require a plain language summary. Some journals require them, so it's good to be aware that you may come across them, or you may have to write one yourself one day. They are an important part of DEI initiatives aimed at making research more accessible to non-specialists, but the plain language summary is not necessarily going to be a component of every article's front matter. If you do need or want to write them, follow the same basic formula as your abstract, using the problems, methods, and takeaway format, but present the information with greater simplicity. Don't assume the readers have any prior knowledge, and if possible, have a non-specialist read your PLS before you publish it. So here's an example of how you might simplify an abstract for a PLS. Notice how the language is much simpler when it comes to the plain language summary. So while the abstract uses words like retrospective analysis, contributory factors, and the abstract references specific groups and classifications like the National Reporting and Learning System and the Patient Safety Research Group, the plain language summary doesn't use any of that technical jargon and instead uses simple language to communicate the research. And if you're looking for more resources on plain language summaries, you're able to visit this link below from SAGE that will give you more resources. So there's multiple kinds of abstracts. Robert walked us through written abstracts, but another way to capture your reader's attention is a visual abstract, if that is applicable to your research. So this could come in the form of using infographics, clear headings, text, colors, and shapes, and all these can help visually represent key components of your articles. The problem, methods, and takeaways format should still be included, though, just as in a standard abstract. And so when you organize your visual content, remember that it is visual and think about where your reader's eye is going to go and what things you might want to emphasize. So here's an example of an infographic being used as a visual abstract. See how it shows the problem, data, and takeaways. So in the beginning, at that top part, we have employees of two companies with access to a treatment cost calculator, and we're seeing how they use this cost calculator. Next, we have the data. 11% of the employees are using the tool. 854 used it 3 times, and we have some of the other demographics of employees that are using it. And finally, in the bottom part, we have the takeaway, which employers and payers need to pursue strategies to increase interest and engagement with healthcare price information, particularly among consumers with higher medical spending. To show another example that doesn't always have to be infographic. If your subject matter is photographic or easy to photograph or image heavy, then you can use images in your visual abstract. But see how it continues to use this 3-part structure to highlight the important aspects of the research. And not all disciplines are necessarily friendly to visual abstracts, but some might. And so if you think this is something that would work for your research to display some photos or infographics, then we encourage you to explore that. And it's important to remember that not all journals, to again revisit submission guidelines, because different journals might have different policies about visual abstracts. So when it comes to promoting your article on social media or in your networks, impact is the key feature. You really want to boil down your research into its impact. Readers tend to be grabbed less by methodology or history of the discipline. Really, readers want to know, so what? What is your article contributing to an important topic? So in this case, you can use social media accounts, blogs, and your personal or professional networks to the fullest extent. Work some of your keywords into your promotional content, but note that social media posts can be more informal. You would use more of the style of your plain language summaries. For promoting your article, you want to distill the core takeaways of your article through plain language summary, a visual infographic, or maybe even a 2-minute video. Conferences are also a good opportunity to plug your article. You can get your university involved, or you can consider writing a press release if your article is newsworthy and has impact beyond your area of specialty. You can find more ideas and resources for article promotion at the link here. So it's good to start thinking about promotion as you prepare your article front matter. This is the age of social media, and the marketplace is incredibly crowded. Every year, another 2 million scholarly articles are published. The sheer volume of content and constraints on time to keep up with the literature means that inevitably not all of these articles will be widely read. Here at SAGE, we will make sure that your article is easy to find by indexing it on the right places and by marketing the journal worldwide. As the author and as an academic, you already have networks and activities that will be perfect vehicles for simple and effective promotion. You have authority in your field already, so your peers will be receptive to what you have to say. Whenever you do research, be sure to promote your work. So the key takeaways for promotion and search engine optimization. So remember to pull your keywords from your title into your abstract. Some keywords are more crucial than others, so your use of them throughout the title, abstract, and body of your article will vary. Try to repeat the key descriptive phrases. Try to imagine the phrases a researcher might search for if your paper would be of interest in them. But keep in mind that search engines are suspicious of too much repetition and can de-index your article if they suspect bot activity. Focus on just 3 to 4 key terms in your abstract. Point 3, think of your promotional materials as an extension of your front matter, using keywords, framing, and heavily leaning on impact. Remember that research is increasingly discovered through search engines like Google Scholar, so structure your front matter accordingly. How would you find or discover your own piece? Search engines look at the abstract page of your article, which is free for everyone to look at on Sage Journals Online and most other publishers. Your abstract is not only the sales pitch that tempts the researcher into reading your article, it's also the information that gives a search engine all the data it needs to be able to find your article and rank it in the search results page. The better you write your abstract, the better chance you are giving your article to appearing high up in the search results ranking. This is vitally important as researchers will rarely investigate beyond the first 20 results from Google. And I will kick it back to Sean.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. And thank you so much, Robert, for presenting today. So before we move into the Q&A portion, I wanted to give just a heads up on what's coming next from SAGE. So on July 10th, 2 weeks from today, we have our next How to Do Research and Get Published webinar. And this will be all about how to get involved with the journal and how to develop your career. So if you're looking for more brand building and personal connection building, this is a great place to get started. And then after that, if you go to the next slide, please, we've got webinars in August and September about mixed methods methodology, and then how to respond to reviewer comments as well. So another great way to keep up to date on the latest from the industry. And on the next slide, you'll see our SAGE Journal resources. So this has a dedicated space for authors where you're able to come to look to see what's new and where you need help in the publication process. We've got more how to get published resources, more recordings to the webinar series, and for anybody who reads Chinese, we also have the Chinese Author Gateway with more content there. So I want to just say thank you to everybody for joining today. We're going to move into the Q&A portion. So just as a heads up to anybody who is writing in the chat, I've been receiving a lot of questions about recordings. Everyone will receive a recording of the webinar. Those who are attending live will receive a certificate of attendance. Just to note that for this webinar, unfortunately, we're not able to provide personalized certificates, but we will be sending a certificate to all of you who do attend live. And you will also receive a copy of the slides from today. So as always, please submit your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and like any that you want to answer in particular. But first, to get us kicked off, I've seen a lot of questions coming through about article titles and the question about a word limit. So I'm curious, generally, is there a word limit for an article title or any best practice on this?
Yeah, I can start there. There's no, sort of maximum limit. If you submit an article with a title that's, 16 words, it's not going to be rejected outright. Generally 15 or so is kind of a good rule of thumb. You don't want anything longer than that starts to become maybe a bit too long, a bit too unwieldy. There's kind of too much going on. So you want to keep it at around 15 words or less. But again, that's not a hard and fast rule. That's not, grounds for rejection. If you go over 15, it's not some magic number. So the title needs to say what it needs to say. It's more important that the title be clear, that you make, good use of keywords, that the title sort of is connected to the abstract and then to the main article sort of via those keywords as we've been discussing. So it's really the content there is sort of more important in the end, I think, than the length. But just 15 words is sort of a good rule of thumb there.
I would add when it comes to word limits of titles or abstracts, always just make sure to read the manuscript submission guidelines of the journal you're submitting to very closely, because journals might have different standards. They might have different word limit constraints for their titles and abstracts. So just always make sure you read those submission guidelines very carefully, because that's where you might get more information. And when in doubt, you could always email the editor of the journal.
In addition to that, I would also recommend, if you have a target journal in mind, actually perusing that journal to look at published papers in that journal, and you can answer a lot of the questions that were asked by looking at, existing articles in terms of how the abstracts are structured and written and how long the paper is. I mean, there's a lot of questions on that could be answered by looking at a target journal. Somebody asked, though, how do you identify a target journal? That's a little bit of a tough question to answer, in as much as it's field specific. And I would recommend talking to someone in your field about a proper journal for you to submit to. That might be the best way to go, or a mentor if you're new at publishing.
Great, thank you all. That's very helpful and very comprehensive. So another question we're getting a lot of insight into abstracts, and people are curious what actually sits in the abstract as best practice. So for example, should you make notes about research gaps or potential future research, or is that outside of the scope of the abstract? What is the best practice for this?
I would say that very much is within scope, and this is something I maybe should have included in the presentation, is that often that kind of results or takeaway section will gesture toward potential for further research, or the conclusion may make some kind of statement that says, hey, here's what my article contributes to the existing research, right? You might have a sentence that says something along the lines of while X was thought to be the case, my research or my argument shows this other thing to be true. So certainly abstract is definitely a good place to sort of cover that kind of information, right? Sort of what are the gaps in the research? How does your research sort of fill those gaps? And sort of reflecting on that kind of so what question, right? We have this critical question we began with. We addressed it through these methods. We came to a conclusion. Now, what does it all mean? What does it mean for the field? What does it mean for the existing kind of state of research? So certainly that would be something to include in your abstract if appropriate. Again, you need to do it very succinctly. In an abstract, you don't have a lot of room. Often they're sort of 150 to about 300 words or even less. So you don't want to kind of, what you don't want to do is a kind of full literature review, right? Here's the state of the field. Here's all the different kinds of, directions that this research has gone. You want to very succinctly summarize that for your reader and really kind of find that core element that your research has contributed. So do so succinctly and choose your words carefully. But certainly you can address those kinds of questions in your abstract.
Thank you, Robert. Alex, Colleen, anything to add to that, or does that cover it all?
That covers that aspect. There were several, I was sort of taking notes on some of the questions so that I could notice what was coming through, and I don't know whether it's appropriate for me to quickly go through some of those.
Sure.
Sean?
Go for it.
Okay. Keywords are indeed critical. How many words for the abstract is going to be very journal specific. And so the journal will say, this is how you structure your abstract, or they have unstructured abstracts, but it should be 100 words, 200 words, 300 words. It's absolutely journal specific and probably field specific. But, you know, given that I work in one field, I don't know that. I would strongly urge one to look at actual publications in a target journal. So once you've identified a journal that would be appropriate for your work, look at published papers in that journal to see how they are structured. And you can see, you know, different journals have different word limits. They have different sort of structures. They want you to have different headings. They're roughly the same, but they're different for each journal, slightly different for each journal. Let's see. Somebody asked about timeline, like they were commenting on 1 year being, you know, what is the normal timeline for publishing an article? Well, that also varies greatly. And for, you know, some people can put together a good publication in a month. Other people, it might take 2 years, and so, or more. So there's no one right answer, and it gets probably quicker and easier the more you've published. But it's not at all unusual to take some time to get an article ready for publication and then to submit it. And once it's submitted, then it goes to external reviewers in your field. They take their time to review it. They get it back to the editor and they tell the editor what they think. And then the editor comes back to you, the author, and says they would either, you know, reject the article, they would accept it with some kind of revisions, or, you know, revise and resubmit, or whatever. But this all takes some time. Somebody asked what we should not do when submitting articles. And my answer to that and many questions is look at the author guidelines and only follow those. So if it's not part of the author guidelines, don't do it. So don't, you know, if you think, oh, they say I'm supposed to have so many words, but I'm going to double that, it's not going to fly. So you really need to look at the target journal, the author guidelines, and stick to them very, very closely. Somebody asked about submitting articles to more than one journal simultaneously. That is a no-no. You never do that. Submit to whatever journal you think is appropriate. And if you're new at publishing, I would strongly, strongly recommend somebody, a mentor of some sort, guiding you on what journals might be appropriate for your work. I would also strongly encourage a mentor of some sort to read your paper before submitting, if you've not submitted to a journal before. How to find references. You'd be searching, depends on what topic you're, you know, I look at PsycInfo a lot. I look at PubMed a lot, but I don't, you know, everybody's got their own field. And so they would be looking at different, they're not search engines. Help me out here, Sean. Medline, PubMed, PsycInfo, Alex?
Yeah, the indexes.
Indexes. Thank you. That's the word that I'm thinking of, indexes. So people commonly use ones that are, you know, I don't go outside of mine because the ones that I use, because that's where the publications fit. My publications would fit in those search engines. So all right. I'm not sure. I probably missed some, but I was just trying to take notes and write some answers. So
Yeah, thank you for that, Colleen.
Mhm.
That was very helpful and good insight on a lot of the questions that have come through. I do see some additional questions here that I'd like to address to the group.
Yes.
So one of them here I've got is about tips for if there's any tips to discovering catchy keywords. How do you find the best keyword? And Alex covered this a bit when he was talking about looking on Google and seeing what do you look to look up this topic. Something from a marketing perspective to keep in mind is that words have great results. So the word science will spit back a ton of results, but that won't actually help you find your article. So really being direct, concrete, and resolute with your keywords is super helpful. Colleen, Robert, Alex, anything else to add there? Any other tips for that?
Yeah, I think like you were saying in that slide, I mentioned using metabolic pathways instead of metabolism. I think to your point, yeah, the more specific you can be, the lesser pool of keywords you're working with. So if you can be more specific and direct, there's more chances of your article being discovered rather than being kind of lost in a huge pool. If you use a general keyword like science or surgery or research, so the more specific you can be, the more likely your article is to be discovered within that keyword pool.
Great, thank you.
I think too, and we've been saying some form of this in most of our answers, but it's so true in academia. It is field specific. So it sort of depends what field you're coming from. Pay attention to sort of other, keywords that other articles and authors are using. If there's kind of, a trending topic that should become, clear as you sort of peruse keywords of other articles, looking on social media. Again, as others have already said, you don't want to choose, keywords that are so common that the search engine is just going to spit out, 100,000 results. So you want to sort of find the trending topics that are nonetheless sort of specific enough and kind of narrowed enough that they're going to be meaningful. And again, just pay attention to kind of what's going on in your field, what are people talking about, and apply that as closely as you can to your own research.
Great, thank you. I've got another question here that I think is very interesting about what you shouldn't, but also what you shouldn't do when you submit an article. So is there something that as a hard and fast rule that people should not do at the start of their articles? And again, this is to maximize the chance of publication. Is there something that you'd recommend people avoid doing?
I would avoid doing anything that is different than what's in the author guidelines. So if I'd take a look at the author guidelines and your target journal, and then look at some published papers in that journal to see how they are. And I would recommend strongly not to deviate too much from that, because that's likely to just be rejected on its face.
And building on that too, really pay attention. Most journals, all SAGE journals, include a kind of aims and scope section on the journal website. Really make sure as you're submitting that your journal falls within those aims and scope. Often that's a kind of a detailed description from the journal that sort of shows, hey, this is what we're about. This is the kind of research that we accept. If your article is sort of out of scope, that's often the number one reason why a paper is rejected. It might be a perfectly good paper, a perfectly good piece of research, but if it's not the kind of thing the journal publishes, they're not going to accept it. They're going to recommend that you send it somewhere else. And so that plays into, sort of how you structure your title, how you structure your abstract. What is it that your research is accomplishing? And, really making sure, again, to Colleen's point of just always looking at those manuscript guidelines, pay attention as well to the aims and scope of the journal and make sure that your article kind of fits within the parameters of the kinds of things that journal sort of publishes to begin with.
And in answer to the question somebody asked if you could submit to more than one journal at a time. The answer to that is no, not simultaneously. You send your manuscript to one journal, and you need to wait until the outcome of that, whether it's publication or rejection, you need to wait. You cannot submit your article to multiple journals at once, waiting for one of them to publish it. That's unethical.
Yeah, good point, Colleen. Thank you for sharing that. I've got another question here about the actual writing of an abstract and what best practice is for it. So someone's asked, is it advisable to write it at the start of a paper, or should I write it at the end? Like, should you already complete your manuscript and then write the abstract? Do you write them simultaneously? What's your advice on that?
I definitely write them at, maybe people have different ways of doing this, but I definitely wait until the article is written. And then I write the abstract, and the abstract can be challenging to write in as much as part of it is formulaic, but it's really critical because your paper will get read or not read based on both its title and its abstract. I mean, if they look at the abstract, they will dismiss it if they think it's not worth their reading. So it's, the abstract is absolutely critical, as is the title.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. Your article can, as I said in the presentation, often where you begin is not where you end. So, your article, as you're developing it, as you're drafting, redrafting, as it goes through kind of multiple stages of edits, your article, in the end might turn into something very different than where you began. So you really want to kind of save in the title as well, both the title and the abstract for, when your article is already complete or very close to complete, so that you can kind of reflect on, what do I actually have in front of me? How do I kind of represent the article in the most accurate way? So if you're trying to do your title and you're trying to write a title abstract too early, you're not really representing, the truth or kind of the actuality of your article, in the stage that it ends up in. So definitely sort of save everything we've talked about today. Really needs to be saved for kind of later in the process when your main article is more or less complete, and you can sort of begin to do that work of reflecting on, hey, what is it that I argued? What is it that I wrote? And kind of structure these front matter materials accordingly.
Great, thank you very much. And I think we've got time for just one last question. And a number of people have asked specifically about adding question words into the titles. Just curious if this is generally advisable or if it's not recommended.
To put the title in the form of a question.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it. It's not real common. I've seen it sometimes too with a question followed by an answer. So it may be discipline specific, but I would look at, again, the journal that you're targeting and see if it's something that's not been done. I probably wouldn't be the first to do it. But I mean, it could be if it's a provocative title. Then yes, so I wouldn't say that it's something you would never do.
Great, thank you, Colleen. And I think that wraps up our talk for today. So I want to thank first our panelists, Alex, Robert, and Colleen, for joining us today and for your valuable insights into this topic. From all the questions we've received today, we can see that there's a lot going on and people have a lot of thoughts and questions on this. So please continue to engage with us and please continue to reach out to SAGE in any of our webinars. And we're happy to work with you as you work through your publication process. So thank you to everybody for joining, and we hope to see you in a future webinar. And in the meantime, take care.